Welcome to Recovery Radio by Landmark Recovery with your host, Zach Crouch. In this program, we'll discuss the root causes and treatments of alcohol and substance addiction, speak with experts in related fields, and help navigate the road to recovery. Now, here's the host of Recovery Radio, Zach Crouch.
Hello, I'm Zach Crouch, host of the Recovery Radio podcast, your source for addiction and recovery news and knowledge. If you know someone struggling with drugs or alcohol, Recovery Radio is here to help. We are dedicated to providing you with the tools to help you or a loved one take the first step on the road to recovery. Joining us on the show today is Michelle McGinnis. Michelle is a licensed clinical social worker and the Chief Clinical Officer of Landmark Recovery. She's been in the substance abuse industry for over 10 years and has been critical in the creation of Landmark Recovery's programming. Michelle is a firm believer in evidence-based practices, and this has allowed her to help individuals with whatever substance abuse problem they may be struggling with. Michelle, I've known you for quite a while now, and it's just it's good to have you on on the show and actually have some time to talk.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So, if you don't mind, tell the audience just a little bit about what is your background in education?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you've already indicated, I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I completed my master's program at the Kent School of Social Work at the University of Louisville, and then that was a master's in social work. And prior to that, I attended University of Oregon, where I was a double major in psychology and women's studies with a minor in sociology. So lots of behavioral health and people sciences.
Go Ducks, right?
Yes, absolutely. Also cards. It's always tricky when they play each other.
Yeah. So it begs the question, what team do you go for then?
I'd say for basketball, University of Louisville. That's women's basketball, although I do like the men's team as well. But for Oregon, I would follow football if I followed football, but I don't do it very often. So.
Got it.
And then that's my education as far as my background. So I have been working in substance use treatment in some capacity pretty much my entire career. As you said, I've had over 10 years experience. I've done pretty much every role that you can have. I've been a tech where I was, caring for adolescents who are in a residential treatment facility. Most of them had substance use issues that brought them into residential treatment. So I was a tech for a company that cared for adolescent girls, and then moved into community healthcare where I was a private practitioner working with individuals. My team was specialized. We were treating trauma and substance use disorders that were often co-occurring. Mostly I worked with the children who had been removed from their home due to parental issues of some sort. Most of it was related to substance use. And then my role was kind of work through trauma and help towards family reunification. And I've also worked on the other side of the treatment, which is working for an MCO and utilization review for kind of a large MCO.
So, when you and I first began at Landmark, there was really nothing. I mean, there was no clinical programming. There was no policies, procedures, really. There was nothing, right? So we were starting from the ground up. And one of the big pieces that you pushed for in the beginning, and it materialized, especially with our programming now, was based upon your time and working for an MCO as a UR person. And you saw some things that were just not really, I don't know, savory is not the right word, but that you didn't care for too much when you were doing reviews on these different treatment centers that you would call on. And it informed your decision to put in place the program that you did. Why do you think that was so important, working for the MCOs and how it informed your views?
I think, I've had a lot of work experiences that I kind of landed in and wasn't quite sure what I would get out of it. I went over to the MCO thinking, oh man, I'm burnt out from patient care. This will be like a nice break. And then I learned, it was a huge education for me in what practices are really helping people recover long term and just helping people through things that they're going through in life. And so from the MCO lens, we saw a lot of, I'd call up a provider that was, providing residential treatment, and ask them, tell me about your treatment program. And they would describe to me what their treatment program was. And it was basically, they put the patients in a van and then took them to AA meetings in the community for 8 hours a day.
Right.
And I could, I was like, well, what's happening there? That, like, is there a therapist? Like, are you providing therapy? Or you're just taking them to things they can get in the community? And so from, the MCOs, which had a number of, really talented and knowledgeable clinicians that ended up there, was looking at what are the evidence-based practices. The insurance company really wants their members to get better.
Right.
They want their members to live the best lives so that they are, have good outcomes. They're very outcome driven. So what the MCOs look for are what are the treatment approaches that are driving good outcomes. And, there wasn't a lot of evidence to support that putting people in a van and taking them to 12-step meetings was leading to good outcomes, because it wasn't really giving them the tools they needed to work through, not just their substance use disorders, but also the co-occurring issues that are kind of contributing to life disruption and dysregulation. So for me, it was learning a lot about, that's when I learned, before I started working at an MCO, I really had very little knowledge of anything other than that there were other mutual support groups out there. It's something as simple as when you leave treatment and you attend kind of meetings that are supportive of your recovery efforts, that there was more than just 12 steps. I was taught 12 steps early in my career, and that's kind of what I knew. And in the MCO world, I learned that there are a ton of them. One that I was very drawn to because the outcomes were very positive was Smart Recovery, and then dove into learning as much as I could about Smart Recovery and what it was built on, which was evidence-based treatment models, MI, CBT, REBT, and then there's several more others than that, but I couldn't get focused on everything. Right. So I learned a lot about what was available as far as not just treating patients while they're inpatient, but what they needed to be, kind of have long-term recovery and have the support necessary to change their lives long-term.
So sure, yeah. So you've had a pretty unique experience in that regard, just by working, on both sides of the fence, so to speak. Is that something that, people, particularly who are coming out of grad school, who maybe get thrown into one of these other programs that we're talking about here, would you recommend or even consider, those people like to work for an MCO is to broaden their experience? Do you think that'd be a really good thing for a lot of people?
I think, MCOs, I think they get a lot of bad press for, denials and things like that. But, they're definitely innovators in looking at it's good for them if their patients have good outcomes. Their reality is the more people that don't use their insurance, the better it is for them as a company. So if we have good the outcome of that is if it's for the right reasons, because patients are getting better because they're getting the right treatment at the right time with the right support, then that benefits not just insurance companies, but it benefits everyone because people get better. So I think, yes, you can learn a lot, but I think you also have to be a lifelong learner and be looking for the learning opportunities. Well, not everyone at the MCO was a learner, but I was, and I was very intrigued by things I hadn't heard about.
I think that, just from hearing you talk and knowing you for quite some time now, I think that one of those things, correct me if I'm wrong, it allowed you the opportunity to ask those questions that maybe you wouldn't have known how to ask before.
Absolutely.
Without having had that experience.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Very cool.
It's definitely led to missteps in my career, but, it's always about asking questions, looking at outcomes. If I do something, what happened what was the outcome? How did it affect my patient positively or negatively? And if it's positive, then keep doing that thing.
Absolutely. So what brought you to choose a career in addiction treatment?
Probably going to sound like every single other person that works in the field. It was just a personal passion. my career really started with trauma. I knew very early on that I wanted to work in trauma. I wanted to help people who had this event happen in their life and were really dealing with it, struggling, and get them to a better functioning place. But I think trauma and substance use are just so intertwined that it just naturally led me into substance use and treating substance use disorders. And it would be the bigger question is what led me to be a therapist, more so that jumping into trauma and substance use was just a very natural pivot for me. Becoming a therapist, because I started off my career, my educational career, as an art major, fine arts. And I took psychology as an elective during my first year of college. And then after that first class, switched my major from fine art into psychology. It just didn't seem like drawing and painting and writing movie scripts was as important as helping people change their lives and get better.
Got it. So you've been at a Landmark now for going on 4 years, and you've had a multitude of different roles during that time. And, I remember you and I, when we first got started, you were in there as I was getting this place ready for the first patient to walk in. I remember you making beds. I remember us
painting,
doing pressure washing, etc. And shout out to Matt Boyle, who is our COO, who could probably use a little bit of training in pressure washing still, but that's besides the point. So tell us about your current role at Landmark. What is that, and what's your day-to-day look like?
Yeah, so my current role is I'm the Chief Clinical Officer, which my primary responsibility in that role is to make sure that all Landmark facilities, wherever they are, whatever state they are in, maintain that they stay licensed and they stay operational. So it's to kind of manage day-to-day compliance with our policies and procedures, as well as all regulatory kind of rules and elements that are out there, whether it be our state license regulation or our accreditation through Joint Commission, just making sure that we're always kind of continuously compliant so that we are able to operate without interruption. That's kind of primary, so compliance officer-y sort of stuff. And then the other side of that is managing our clinical outcomes, which means managing our clinical program, making sure that it is doing what it's supposed to do, which is making people kind of get the tools that they need to be better and make change in their life. So it's kind of continually evaluating the quality of our program using outcome measures, so surveys and things like that, and feedback from the patients on how well the program is helping them. And then part of maintaining our current program, adding and changing the program. I oversee our clinical programming committee, which is a global committee here at Landmark where anyone from a facility level can be part of it. And we look at all of our lesson plans and evaluate how they're going on the ground with the patients. Look at anyone really can suggest a lesson plan that be rolled into our curriculum. And so we're responsible for reviewing it to see if we want to roll it into our programming as is. And then another part of the clinical program is also just maintaining innovation. So researching new or emerging interventions that are going to help people either with trauma, substance use, or both, and seeing if they're appropriate for our program. So research and development.
Which goes right along with our mission, vision, and values, which is being a thought leader in this in this space, and not really resting upon maybe even a tried and true method. I mean, we want to keep those in place, but to continue to build upon the basis and foundation that you've helped create.
Yes.
So just with regard to the compliance thing, because I think that's a really important piece, especially as some of these, other treatment facilities open up that are not compliant, there's going to be a need for, I would just say, more Michelles, right? Especially as we have a pretty aggressive growth plan in the future. So with that in mind, are you training people to help out with that piece, the compliance and grow. And what kind of person needs to be in that place? Like, what's the personality, or not even personality, professional skill set of that person look like?
Well, I don't really know the answer to that specifically. I mean, I would say someone who's very knowledgeable of our program, not just our program, but how our program currently meets our regulatory and accreditation standards, and attention to detail. I mean, it's a detail necessary position. So it's someone who can make the connections between everything and remember them. It's a lot to keep track of. You have, from state to state, regulations vary, just sometimes even just minutely,
right.
Sometimes very dramatically. So what we do, our overall goal is we want to make sure that our operations and our compliance with regulatory standards are what's right. We operate in a way that's best for Landmark, not necessarily we don't operate we want it to flow well for our employees and our patients, but also make sure we meet regs. So someone who isn't too rigid in their thinking, but then is also rigid at the same time, because you do have to be compliant. So it's tricky. I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that. That's a tricky question, Zach.
Well, I think that you probably answered it. I think that, one thing I would ask you is we had talked about this a while back when we first started together, is I was like, this is amazing. Like, how do you keep up with all this stuff? Right. And you just said to me very succinctly, you said, it's all up in my head. I just keep, so, is that the case still? Do you still, or is there a system that works for you that you've learned over the years? It's like, man, I've got all these different things on my dashboard, and this is how I manage all this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm moving towards that. What I think one thing that we've learned over the nearly 4 years of operations here at Landmark is that you can't store important things in someone's brain.
Right.
So if there's things I'm remembering, and there's things that I know that are important, what we're in the phase of from a company is like, write those things down, develop a system around it. So in the event that, Michelle McGinnis was no longer here, that we would still continue to operate and help people. I can't keep things in my brain. They have to be systems that are sustainable over time.
Sure.
So that's like kind of the phase that we're at right now, is like writing all that stuff down. I was actually thinking of a funny story about compliance that, as I'm working with lots of other professionals who have been in compliance in some elements, and hearing their compliance stories compared to my compliance stories, it's always pretty funny. And who knew that there's funny stories about compliance, right? It's about the most dry thing that you can create, but it comes with a lot of power. Being responsible for compliance for a company is, if I read a regulation and I interpret it a certain way, and
right.
I write a policy and a procedure because I read this in a regulation, that is now something that someone has to do on the ground, on the floor with a patient. And
right.
if I got it wrong, and they might have to do too much. So funny story. So I was working with our executive director in Oklahoma City, and she had all these funny little tags hanging from, especially two things that were cracking me up. So she has these funny little tags hanging from like every single plug, to a lamp, to a computer. Everything had this little like paper tag that said like, check such and such date. And I was like, what on earth are these funny little tags on everything? And she's like, well, it's Joint Commission standard. And I said, what do you mean it's a Joint Commission standard? She's like, you have to tag every cord saying you checked it and that it's not faulty and that it's fine. I said, well, you have to test your equipment, and how you choose to document it varies. She's like, so someone came up with the rule that you have to like create this individual tag for every single electrical outlet thing. And she was like, someone made that up in the compliance department. Now I have to do it. And it was the same with like coffee stirrers. So she had like she came to the Louisville facility and was like, you guys don't have coffee stirrers at your coffee station. And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, you have to have them for Joint Commission standards. I'm like, well, okay. Again, I think that let's talk about what the regulation, what the standard says, and what you have to do. So ultimately, I agree with her from an infection control standpoint. Swizzle sticks was a much easier way to help maintain infection control from a coffee stand. But it's just funny. So if I make a policy, someone has to follow it somewhere. So I have to make sure that it makes sense for us. because we don't want our staff doing silly things
Right.
that are not necessarily what we have to do. So that's the trickiness of compliance. I read a reg, I read a standard. How does that look for? How do I have to execute that on the ground? So
Right.
having like the team around us, having like the other executive team members, and just having like feedback from the facility itself of what do we need to be doing to meet this standard, not necessarily like what I think might be, because I had made a crazy one too. Like I'm just as bad as everyone else. Like one of the Joint Commission standards was you have to have a plan. So if your power goes out, you have to have a plan. If you have medication that requires refrigeration,
Right.
you have to have a plan. What are you going to do with it if it goes over 4 hours? Because after 4 hours, you have to have a plan.
Yeah.
So I come up with this very elaborate, you've got this plug-in generator, and then that plug-in generator, you plug the refrigerator, the med refrigerator in, and you test this battery-powered generator every week to make sure it's functional. And then I spoke to Joint Commission during my annual conference with them, and they're like, or you could have just written your policy to say after 4 hours, we'll discard the medication. And I was like,
Right.
oh, that's a
yeah.
lot easier.
Yeah. But you wouldn't know that unless you had written the policy and then sort of pressure tested it against, what the Joint Commission said would be kosher, right?
Exactly. I mean, you kind of jump to like, what do they need you to do? And sometimes you come up with very elaborate answers when it was as easy as, well, after 4 hours, you just say you throw it out.
Yeah.
And order new medication.
Yep.
Oh, that makes sense.
So focusing back on and this is all well and good. So focusing back on the treatment program that you built, what is the importance though of building a treatment program that really focuses on treating trauma?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to make up this number. They also say that like 85% of statistics are completely made up anyway. When you look at trying to separate, like, I think back into the early days of substance use treatment and this idea of chicken, which came first, chicken or the egg, co-occurring disorders or substance use, like which do you treat first? And there was this thinking of you had to treat them separately. Like first you have to treat the co-occurring, then you have to treat the substance use, or you have to treat the substance use first, then the co-occurring. And now we've moved as a field, and so we don't have to separate them anymore because they're not separated. They are combined. Co-occurring, whether it be trauma, which would presents as depressive symptoms, anxious symptoms, dissociative symptoms, whatever they're manifesting as, trauma and substance use, they go together. These things are intertwined. So to try to separate them is just more work than it needs to be. And majority of our patients, I'd say 98% of the patients walking through the door at any given substance use treatment program in the United States is walking in with trauma. Most of the time they don't know they've had it. Most people don't recognize their own trauma because they don't believe what they went through was as bad as someone else. So we do a lot of comparison with other people. Say, oh, well, I wasn't in combat. I didn't have to see my buddies die, or I wasn't physically abused as a child horrifically. Like a lot of people jump to like worst case scenarios of like being locked in a basement as like that's trauma. But trauma is whatever trauma is. It's anything that an event that impacts us and then creates functionality, like functional dysfunction for us. It doesn't have to be severe as we think it is, but we kind of hear the word trauma and we think like combat, we think horrific car accident, surviving a plane crash, things like that. But the traumas can be much different than that. So one of the big things that we focus on at Landmark is if you can identify that you've experienced trauma, you at least know what direction you're heading. So my biggest goal, my takeaway for patients is if they leave Landmark with one thing, they're able to recognize I have trauma in my history, so I have to treat that as well as my substance use, and that they go together.
Yeah.
So I'm a huge believer in learning to screen early for adverse childhood experiences or ACEs.
Yeah. Right.
So during our every patient that walks into Landmark, whether they're coming into our inpatient program or outpatient program, they're getting an ACE screener to find out, to help them identify, oh my gosh, I did have trauma. Because what we know is if you score a 4 or above on an ACE, you're likely to have adverse experiences as an adult, whether it be a physical symptom like heart disease or diabetes, something physical, or mental health, substance use disorder or a mental health disorder, or both, or all three. You might have all three of them, and it's because of those ACEs. But we don't think about those ACEs as an adult, because as an adult, I go, well, I wasn't in a bad car accident. I wasn't raped. I wasn't in combat. But I did grow up in a home that was unsafe.
Yeah. So I mean, as you're talking about this, because I was thinking about those people that come in and they maybe they can identify, but particularly those people that come in also that are, it's like trying to pull teeth, convincing someone that this was traumatic, right? In any sense of the word, like from an observable outside perspective, but maybe through their own, some people might call it traumatic bonding, trauma bonds, whatever it was that they had occur in their life, that they are unwilling or are unable to sort of identify that this was in fact a traumatic event for them. How do you work with those kinds of cases?
I think that's where the group setting comes in really handy, especially with male, it tends to be with male population, that this is a bigger barrier, because men are taught you got to be tough, and everyone has adversity, and it's just what makes you tougher. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps and keep going. So being in the group setting, and we have a group that's specifically designed for learning to learn about trauma, what it looks like, and how to identify it, and seeing kind of other men or other people in that group uncover their own trauma experiences and be able to identify, hey, this experience as a child did affect me today, and it's okay that happens, and but it's not necessarily. I don't like the word normal, but like it shapes the way that how I got here. So kind of helping them. It's not about identifying trauma to see like this weakness or this area of blame, but like what are the contributing factors that go. Everyone always asks when they come to Landmark, what's the root of my addiction? Yeah, right. Most likely trauma. Trauma. Right. ACEs specifically. If you that's we learn how to create emotional upsets, and it shapes how we respond to things. And as we respond to things, and those responses are using substances to cope with these upsets, then those ACEs contribute to that addictive behavior long term. So is part of Landmark's work, I mean, the trauma piece especially, is that unless you're able to self-regulate at some level, like you can't work through some of this stuff, because it just becomes so overwhelming once you begin to think about it, process it, whatever. And how does Landmark help out with that? Yeah. So, we're, in addition to starting to unpack trauma, we're developing safety measures all around it, buffering, kind of wrapping people in bubble wrap so that they don't get hurt. Because the last thing you want to do is kind of start unpacking things that someone's not emotionally equipped to be able to do. So we teach, pretty simple, easy to use coping strategies. And before we start diving in, one of the things, once patients start identifying, oh my gosh, there's this trauma, they sometimes want to like dive head first in. And it's like, whoa. Yeah. You don't even know how to tread water. Tie your shoes. Swim. Right. Yeah. Like we're not there yet. So it's kind of helping them to see that tip of the iceberg and know that there's more underneath. And we're a short-term program, the residential component, 35 days to start unpacking trauma is not quite. So what we're focusing on is identifying and then buffering with, here are some strategies and here are the things that you're going to need to support the trauma work that you're going to be kind of starting your journey on. So we're just at the beginning, and we're kind of getting them set up. We're filling their backpack, so that as they go on this journey, that their backpack is full of the supplies that they're going to need to be able to navigate this safely. It's a great analogy. So, as the people come into our treatment program in the residential piece, you bring up an interesting point about, trauma and how, a lot of these people that come in, a lot of the significant trauma in people's lives has been caused by those people who were closest to them. And with people who are in our program, how much contact do patients get to have with their loved ones during their inpatient stay? And when or how are they able to connect with them? And it's kind of a three-part question, I guess. Answer it as you like. Yeah. But
How do you decide as a therapist or a clinician when it's not best to include someone in the visitation?
Yeah. So family involvement, could be on day one. If they're accompanying their person to intake, they would be present for a portion of the intake process until our staff kind of determine, hey, it's at this point that we separate, say it's time for this your loved one to enter treatment, and now it's time for you to kind of go, and we let them say goodbye and have some closure. So they're involved often on day one, on that first day when they come into the program. So, and it also helps us gather some collateral information. So we have the patient tell us what's going on, then we could have their family members tell them their perspective, because sometimes they differ. So day one, and then from there, a patient, we do restrict contact for the first 72 hours. Those first couple of days are really, someone's very vulnerable. There's a lot of times that you're in a new environment, no matter how safe and supportive that environment is, it's new. So we try to, limit so that person that's coming in builds connections to the program and other members of the program, like other residents. And from there, the family can be involved really at how much they want to be involved or how much that person wants them to be involved. So standard, we have visitation is a 1 hour a week on the weekends, and then they get a phone call that is made and facilitated by their primary therapist. So not a whole lot of just open contact. So those are the two that are kind of unstructured contact, just regular visitation. Phone call once a week and visitation once a week. Other than that, the families can be involved in different ways. So on Saturdays, the family is invited to attend. It is I'm going to call it a workshop. So there's
yeah, I was going to say family day, right?
Yeah, family day. It's almost like a family workshop. So the family can come in. They come in at 9 a.m. and they're going to be in a family psychoeducation group that's facilitated by our alumni and family therapists. And so it's teaching the family, and it's without their person present. So the person's in treatment doing their own group therapy, so they're not with their loved one. It's just family and support members attending this family psychoed. They have topics that are focused on what that family member needs to know about addiction in general, and about what their person's going through, like how addiction was developed, what families look like in addiction, family roles, genetics, epigenetics, all, there's a ton of education. So that's a 2 hour day. And then they go from that, they're able to join their support person or their loved one in in actually attending a smart recovery meeting that's on site. And then they go into a family process group. And so the family process group is a family psychotherapy group. It's pretty intense. We call it knee to knee. And that's being able to kind of talk through how that person's addiction has impacted the family members or support members. So it's a pretty intense day where families, able to be involved for as long as they want. And then after that family group, they have that open visitation. There might be, if a therapist has determined that the family is very, going to be a big part of this person's recovery environment, then they may have like individual family therapy throughout the week. They might get like an hour session that's, patient, family, and therapist. But that varies from person to person. It would really depend on how healthy those loved ones and supports were to that person's recovery.
Sure. So what are the benefits then of including loved ones in a patient's treatment program?
Well, it's reality. They're going to leave you. When I was in the MCO world, doing reviews with facilities, one of the biggest things we always would ask about was the discharge plan. What's the discharge plan? This person's not going to live at Landmark, so what are they going to do when they leave here? And so many facilities would tell me back, well, they're going to go home with mom, or they're going back home with their wife, or this. And I'm like, okay, so when have the family been involved to know when that person comes home what to do? And they're like, well,
sure.
They're not. They haven't been to anything. I'm like, what? So you're sending this person
right.
home to an environment that has no idea what to do with that.
Right.
Because addiction, while it's individual, that there's one person that's substance using, it's a family system problem. It's not something that's in isolation. So the family members have been affected by this. The family members need to understand how to support someone in early recovery, because support can look a lot different. I think we look at an environment, patients going home to an abusive. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, in terms of the buy-in, right, that family members that come through, for instance, our program have, in believing that, right, that this is a family disease, it's a family process. Is it 50-50, or is it more like 80% believe it or are willing to do work, or is it more 20% believe it? No, you need to fix this person and then we can get our lives back together.
Oh God, I probably need to query the therapist on the ground. I don't know that, but
yeah.
I mean, it's tough though, because when we look at it, it's a family process. When we look at the family system, I think it's easy to want to say, well, just fix this person. But then we look at how the family system organizes around someone who's an active user to help support them, because we care about them. I can't tell you how many moms I've met who are loving their children to the point of that making their children more sick. Not on purpose, because they don't know. They're like, oh, you're going to jump off this cliff? Well, let me get down to the bottom and catch you, and then they both get smashed. And, because we love our children and we want to take care of them, but sometimes loving our children means setting limits and setting boundaries. Or I think the classic, you get on an airplane and they tell you, I'm a mom, and when I first started getting on airplanes with my son, like my instinct is to just ignore the flight attendant when they tell me if the air pressure drops and the cups come down, put yours on first, secure your mask, and then put it on your child. And I'm like, yeah, right. Like, I am going to put that on my kid first, and then I'm going to put mine on. And, I had to work through and say, wait a second, then we both die, because I have to take care of, you have to take care of yourself. So with family members, I don't think it's about looking at who you teaching them. It's not about blame. It doesn't matter how the system got here. It got here. Now let's fix it. And part of fixing it means we're fixing our own issues as well as our family issues. And we can't rush into, most families want to come in and start working on their deep-rooted issues. And it's like, wait a second, none of you have the coping capacity to do this. Like, let's get good at coping and work through your own issues. Then let's work together as a family on the other stuff.
We give all these people that come through our program this backpack full of tools. And, yes, 4 times per month or 4 times during the course of a person's treatment, the family's coming to get their tools filled, hopefully during that time. But to be honest, that is really just a starting point for so many of these families coming through. They would do well to probably go off and, in tandem with the person who's in treatment, if they could, maybe even do like some sort of codependency workshop, somewhere, or, that's kind of an easy way to put it. But I think that,
they need their own person and they need to do their own work as well. Yeah.
So as we're sort of winding down, there's a couple more questions. Tell us about a patient stay. How scheduled is a patient stay, and what is the value, in your opinion, of structuring it that way?
Oh, it is very scheduled. They are in a scheduled activity pretty much from the moment they wake up until they go to sleep. We have limited amounts of free time, and that is purposeful. They came into this program to get those tools and learn the things that they need to kind of embark on their recovery journey. And while free time is very important to that as well, we want to make sure that this person in early recovery learns how to structure their own time. Now, they don't have to leave Landmark and have a Landmark program. That's a lot. It's like an 8-hour work day. But it's taking when we don't have structured time, it's easy to lose track of things. Yeah. And when we lose track of things, it's easy to kind of fall back into old patterns and old behaviors. Yep. So the structure is, one, we have a lot of information to cram in to those limited amount of days that we have. So we try to kind of put as much as we can in those days. And then just to help kind of keep people focused on the right thoughts. When we have downtime, we tend to go into our heads and drift off, and our heads are not always a great place in early recovery because of things like errors in thinking and cognitive distortions and dwelling on things we can't change, or dwelling on things we shouldn't feel like we need to change. So keeping them busy is a very important part of the recovery process. It helps them focus on what is important, as well as start to learn tools about how to structure their life when they leave.
Yeah, the delusion can still be very active early on in the recovery process, even though you're free and clear of substances at that point.
Yeah, and it's not, they're not like in school or in classes all day. I mean, they are. So, from about 9 a.m. until about 4 is when you have your core therapy. That's when all their therapy groups are happening. So that's like the work day, right? That's when they're doing the hard work. Prior to that, they're doing work, some looser activities with our patient engagement specialists, doing things like community building,
Right.
which is like fun activities that are not just like fun, but designed to help bring that community closer together so that they learn how to build connections with others. We have physical activities, so fitness center, being able to do fitness related stuff is just learning about what do we need to do to our bodies to kind of continue to feel good.
Right.
So the bulk of the hard stuff in the day is from 9 to 4. That's when they're getting that therapy. And then after that, there's things we do allow. We have about an hour and a half scheduled. They get a lot of homework assignments.
Yeah.
So being able to work on homework assignments, which could be structured journaling, it could be a worksheet that correlates with the learning topics for the day.
Yeah.
And they're kind of assisted with making sure they have time and to work on the things that are going to help stretch what they've learned, the concepts they learned from group into actual application. Because we can learn a lot in group, but if we don't learn how to actually apply it, then it's going to be no good. You got to be able to apply that tool.
Yeah. So I was just going to say, one of the things too, Michelle, that was a big change, I think, for Landmark, especially within the past 3 months or so, is that there's been a huge change in our clinical approach, our programming particularly, because our groups are now led by therapists. They're not led by maybe entry-level positions folk. These are folks who are master's level quality therapists. What went into the decision around creating that change?
Outcomes. We want our patients to get better. We were seeing some of quality inconsistencies when non-master's level were kind of facilitating the groups. And so to help develop consistency across not just programs within one facility, but across our facilities, as a whole, whether it be Louisville compared to Indianapolis compared to Oklahoma City,
right.
That everyone was doing the same things across the country, and that meant everyone had to have the same education level, and we're taught group dynamics. So the patient engagement specialists still do groups with the patients. They're just not psychotherapy groups.
Yeah.
So we moved, our entire model moved towards this emphasis on psychotherapy groups, and that is all facilitated by master's level clinicians.
Got it. So
it was the right decision for the patient.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And with that in mind, I think the people that leave treatment and enter an outpatient treatment following their inpatient stay do quite well. How important do you think it is, though, for people that leave treatment and enter into outpatient treatment afterwards? Why is that so critical?
Because it's support. It's structured support. Those first 35 days, especially if someone enters in detox, their brain is just a mess of just the neurochemistry is not functional to the point that it needs to be at. In fact, the brain of someone who has been using substances for a period of time, that there's a dependence, there you finally see a return to some kind of typical normal pre-use functioning at about a year. And what drives that is building those cognitive connections, and what helps the brain heal are things like behavioral therapies. Right. And being involved in something that helps us make those neural connections again and restore the balance to our brain. And it's important that happens in a structured setting, because left to our own devices, we'll experience things like post-acute withdrawal that leads to periods of just maybe like being down in the dumps. We don't start, we decide not to do our recovery effort for that day, and there's no one we're not accountable to anyone. When you have accountability in your life, you're more likely to do that thing. If I'm trying to get well, like fitness, and I have a personal trainer, and that personal trainer is blowing me up to come and do my training that day, my possibility of outcomes go up, of getting to where I want to go up when I have an accountability partner. Yeah. Outpatient programs are accountability partners, as well as teaching those tools that we need to hit that year mark. And that year mark is when someone's been able to have a sustained behavior change and make it to a year.
Yeah.
So the likelihood of continued success goes up dramatically.
With that in mind too, one thing I'll say to the people listening as well, and if you're in your first year of recovery, right, and you're going through treatment, maybe you're in an outpatient program too, if you pair that with a weekly consistent activity where you're doing something, let's just say with other people in recovery, maybe you're going to a coffee shop, you mentioned fitness, maybe you're going to the gym with other people who are in recovery, you do that weekly with someone for an hour, your chances of staying sober and clean for that first year go up by 50 or 60%. So to your point, having that built-in partner or that person that can hold you accountable is critical. So second to last question here. What are some common misconceptions about recovery treatment that you wish more people knew about?
I don't know. That's a toughie. I think we're getting to a better place, and there's been a lot of more factual examples. I think one would, Zach, I don't know quite the answer to that. Like, what are some misconceptions?
I didn't mean this to stop you, but
no, I'm like, well, because maybe I'm just.
No, it's all good. Yeah, there's no. I think that if I were to take a stab at it, it would be that this idea, especially given what we discussed prior to coming on the air, is that longer term stays in treatment do not equal better outcomes, because they do, right? So by cutting some of the stays in half, how is that going to be helpful, right? Because I don't think it will be. I think it'll be harmful, actually. I think you'll see a significant retread in people who come back to inpatient treatment. And I think that another misconception is that, well, you can just sort of try out this tried and true method that's maybe worked for a subset of your population who've gone through your program, and try it on everybody, because it won't work. You need to be innovative. You have to be innovative in order for this to be successful.
Well, I think that, that actually, thank you. I got to like a brain space where I'm like, what would be a misconception? Is that there's one model that fits everyone. I think growing up in substance use treatment, I saw the kind of people that were like, well, here's what you need. You just need this and this and that. And, if you can't recover from that, then there's something wrong with you. and yes, there are a lot of universal things, but everyone is individual. The experiences we've been through are individual, and they need to be taken into account. So if it's not, you're trying to individualize yourself out of treatment, although that does happen, but not everyone's going to benefit from the same approach.
Yes.
We can't be afraid to try different things at the same time.
I was going to say that's probably where the skills set of our clinicians who are the boots on the ground, so to speak, if they continue to build on their skill sets and recognize that each person who does come in, yes, there's going to be some commonalities, but each person really needs to be treated with, I would say, enough dignity and respect too, to be honored that this person walking in, they might have told 50 other therapists before about their sexual abuse, but this might be the opportunity for you to actually hear for the first time from them, or for them to speak it, that this is how it affected them, right?
Right. Well, I think that's one of the biggest things that we talk about at Landmark, that when I have opportunity to train staff, is the first and foremost thing that we do at Landmark is we're here to restore someone's humanity and their sense of being a worthy human of recovery. If you don't feel like you're deserving of recovery, then your recovery efforts are not going to go well. But when you feel that no matter what you've done, it doesn't matter what you did prior to walking through the door. When you walk through the door of Landmark Recovery, I don't care who you are a person who is deserving of a better life. And that's what we are there to teach them and help them access.
So with that in mind, what's the most rewarding part of your job?
The patients. Seeing them get better. I recently had someone reach out to me who was one of my patients when I was seeing patients one-on-one in the early days of Landmark, and that individual has just achieved 3 years sobriety, and to see people get better and see them change their lives and go through that transformation, it's just, there's nothing on that's better than that.
That's good stuff. Well, any last thoughts, Michelle?
No, I could probably keep talking about this stuff forever, so it's probably best you cut me off.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming on with us today. And I hope all of you listening have enjoyed our podcast. And if you know someone struggling with an addiction and are searching for answers, subscribe and tune into Recovery Radio each week for the most up-to-date information from leading experts. You can listen to Recovery Radio wherever you get your podcast. And before I sign off, if you're looking for inpatient or outpatient drug or alcohol rehab, visit landmarkrecovery.com to learn about their substance abuse programs that are saving lives and empowering families. And until next week, I'm Zach Crouch with Recovery Radio, wishing you well.